Hey, folks, welcome to the fourth episode of the Uncommon Reader podcast. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Today's episode is an interview with Josh Johnson, who you can find on social media at Josh Reads Books. He's also the host of the Compendium podcast, which is a long-form history narrative podcast where he does incredible work uncovering really important stories throughout history. His most recent series just dropped the second episode talking about the Civil War. I'll have that linked in the description for this episode, which is called To the Sound of Distant Guns. He has long-form series on the Vietnam War, interviews with historians, and his debut episode on 1066, one of the most pivotal years in the history of the world. In today's episode, we talk about how we read White Noise by Don DeLillo together. It was an awesome buddy read. If you haven't read White Noise, highly recommend that you do. Don DeLillo is a fantastic author. We also talk about the importance of approaching history and literature from an objective lens. This is a really fun episode, and I was so excited to have Josh on the podcast. This episode will be releasing to paid subscribers 2 days early. So if you haven't subscribed to the Substack yet, you can do so by heading over to chrisdougherty.substack.com. If you're enjoying the show, please like, rate, and subscribe. This helps the show grow. It helps the show be seen by more people, which in turn allows us to do more creative things down the road with the show. As always, I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you sharing, liking, commenting. And now let's get to our interview with Josh Johnson.
It was so frustrating because I feel like it glossed over all the reasons why it had a resurgence. It just attributed it to cowboy bars, basically. And I wish I was exaggerating, but that is actually one of the reasons for its resurgence, as cited in the article, was cowboy bars. So I basically wrote
So they're basically giving credit to Yellowstone,
Yeah.
characters like Rip, as to why Lonesome Dove had a resurgence.
It was because of these cultural factors and women on TikTok. And I was like, I mean, listen, I'm on TikTok. I don't have any room to talk. Let's be serious here. It was not because of me. It was because the book was good.
Josh, welcome to the Uncommon Reader. This has been a long time coming. I was on Compendium earlier in the year. I finally got this podcast up and running and immediately reached out to you to be on the show. Super excited to have you here. Really thankful that you made the time. For those of you that don't know Josh, you can follow him on socials at Josh Reads Books. You can subscribe to his Substack at compendiumshow.substack.com, where you write a lot of long form history. You also do some, more long form written book content. You had a really great piece that tied together the Vietnam War and 9/11 and some really great historical topics that kind of tie into, the long form stuff you're doing on the Compendium podcast. Yeah, really excited to have you here. We're going to talk about some history, some podcasts, and a book that we both read together, which was White Noise by Don DeLillo. How you doing? Thanks for coming on the show. And thanks for being here.
Dude, I'm so stoked to be here. We've been probably plotting this in the background now for weeks, months.
Months for sure.
Very excited to be here.
Yeah, no, the feeling is mutual. Yeah, so you just recently released the second iteration of To the Sound of Distant Guns, which is your long form narrative podcast on the Civil War. I know that you were talking to me a little bit offline about the reception that has received. It's been going pretty well, right? Talk a little bit about kind of everything that's going on with the Compendium show and, kind of what people can expect maybe in Sound of Distant Guns 2. And then I know you have 3 in the works right now.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, I do a long form narrative history show, kind of in the vein of like a Dan Carlin, Daniele Bolelli kind of history show. They are big, chunky boys and they come out, every couple months or something like that. I've done series on 1066, the Vietnam War, and I'm working on the Civil War at the moment. First 2 episodes are out, working on the third one. And the running joke right now is that I've done 7 hours of podcasting about the Civil War, and we've talked about one battle. It's probably not the typical kind of a deal, but there's so much to talk about honestly, if I'm being totally honest, I'm more interested in why I picked this subject with the Civil War. I was more interested in why it started and then the implications of the Civil War after the war was over, more than a play-by-play of all the battles, because you can get completely stuck in a quagmire with battle after battle after battle. But even that said, there are some really cool battles. But it is kind of there's a lot in there. And I've been studying it for, 8 months now. And it's been really fun. The second show just came out and it about killed me. I am slowly kind of working through what Distant Guns 3 is going to look like.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you and I have talked about kind of what that creation process is like. And I'm curious if you could talk about it a little bit before we get into what we're reading. you think about a writer, right? We're going to talk about Don DeLillo here in a little bit because we buddy read White Noise together. You think about a work like White Noise that ends up being probably his most popular, but then you have something like Underworld, which is a 1,000-page work of literature. It's considered his magnum opus. And essentially every show that you're creating for Compendium is a magnum opus type of show, right? The amount of work that goes into these shows is absolutely just fantastic from a scale perspective. Talk a little bit about the creation process, what that looks like behind the scenes, because everybody, when they listen to Compendium, they get the finished product. They get it when it's all shiny and nice and well put together. There's no weird pauses or goofy, messing up of words. It's all this polished work that is ready to sit on display. And that is in and of itself just an entire work of art. So talk about the creation process a little bit and what it's like continually building out these 4 or 5-part monster series that you do over on Compendium.
Yeah, you're probably giving me more credit than is due because there's a planning process, but it's very organic. And it feels a little bit different every show too. Each show kind of is its own thing. And my brain space, each time I really get into another show, it's different. In the past, I've probably tried to do them too quickly. I think the thing that I've realized the more that I've done them is I need to slow down because I get a little burnt out by the time a show comes out. The last 2 times I've released a show, I've been like, I don't want to go anywhere near a microphone for like 6 months because I'm just so over it. I've been sitting in there and I record early in the morning. Basically, the process when I'm actually working on a show is I will, at least for the Civil War shows, I'll read a bunch and then just sort of jot notes down as I'm reading. And then I compile this really big Google Doc with quotes or passages or maybe subjects. And I usually will tab it. So I'll be like, here's a subject, here's a subject, here's a subject. And I just have a ton of quotes. And I will usually look at that doc as my very bare bones outline. And then I tend to put that outline together when I'm recording it. I just kind of sit down and kind of talk through the thing. And usually I get a fairly clean first draft, but it takes like 3 weeks to a month and a half of recording most days before I've actually got something completed. And then I usually will go back through and fact check it, cut sections out that don't really work and maybe redo them. In the most recent show, there was one thing where I misattributed, like there was this whole section where I had misunderstood who actually wrote it. And so I have like a 25-minute section where I'm talking about it as if this one guy wrote it, but this one guy that I thought wrote it had not written it. It was somebody else. So I had to go back and basically scrap, I think it ended up being like an hour section and just redo it. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go find a really tall bridge. That's just kind of how it goes. You just kind of, it is much more organic than it probably should be. I probably should outline it much more, but basically I just come in the booth, record for, try and get 15 to 30 minutes of good recording in and call it a day, come back to it the next morning.
Yeah, it was funny. I was talking to Claire on the last episode and, we were talking about just the content creation process and, she's talking about how long it takes her to come up with a script. And I'm like, I don't script a single video.
I don't either.
I don't know if I have them here. Yeah, I use these for the people that are watching on video. I use these see-through sticky notes and I'll put them on the back of the book with like bullet points of what I want to talk about. So when I'm like, put the book up, I can remember like, oh, that's what I want to talk about.
I remember you did a video like that one time where you were saying, yeah, I put sticky notes in the back. And I was like, that is so smart. Why don't I do that?
Yeah, people are like, that's so smart. And I'm like, no, I'm just so dumb, actually. So that's why it's so smart, because I need it to be able to make a video.
I would be so much more organized if I had a little couple bullet points on the back of a book.
Yeah. And it just, because half the time I'll sit there and I'm just like, and I'll just open it up and I'm like, damn, I don't remember anything. The thing I love about your podcast in particular is because it's like listening to an audiobook. History for some people can be very boring. It can be very dry. It can be very dense. A lot of history is negative and bad things happen and people are kind of drawn to it because of the kind of like scarcity of events that happen in today's world compared to what happened in, past times, or so it seems. It's not that things aren't happening. It's just the world is so spread out now and so disconnected that we're just not experiencing them the way that I feel like people used to previously. Like when something would happen in a place back in the 1600s, it would just stop the show. Like everything shut down because that one thing happened. And so to be able to tell those stories, I think is remarkable, and it's such a great podcast. And so I wanted to start the show off with talking about Compendium because one, I know that there's a lot of work put into it, and two, I think it's a show worth committing the hours to as a listener. For example, I committed the 16 and a half hours that came with Hell in a Small Place. Absolutely fantastic series. It teaches you so much, and it's such a human story that you made out of such an otherwise just really grotesque and visceral piece of history. As a fellow creator, I want to thank you for that true art that you're creating over there. With this being a book podcast, typically the way we start the show is talking about what you're currently reading. I'll talk about what I'm currently reading. We'll just have a quick chit chat about what do we kind of got on the plate, what pages we're flipping through. So let me know what you're reading in November, or kind of just slow burning over the past couple weeks or months.
Yeah, I'm one of those psychopaths that has like 4 books kicking around at the same time. I used to be a one book at a time reader, but I kind of think about reading like a buffet right now. I kind of want a little of this, a little bit of that. If something really arrests my attention, I'll focus on it and I'll put all the other ones away. I'm a psycho and I just kind of pick up here and there. So I've got a lot of things kicking around at the moment. We're doing a book club sort of a deal over on Substack. So I'm reading one of the books we're doing for that. I've got The Stone Door by Leonora Carrington. Not a clue what's happening.
I don't think anybody does. I don't even think Leonora knew what was happening.
No, there's a significant amount of drugs in this. From the first page, you're like, what is going on?
Yeah, no, and then
It's
you
a
get to
mess.
like page 10 and she starts talking about like celestial stars or whatever, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I'm here for the ride now.
Yeah. It's only 100 pages, so I'll probably sit down one afternoon and just crush it. But I've been on page 30 for like 3 days, and I can't get past page 30. I just sit down and read a paragraph, and I'm like, oh my God. And then I just pick up something else. I've got that. Working on it. We'll see. We'll see how that one goes. I got to finish it.
Best of luck
for the
to
book
you,
club.
because I've been on page 13 for a month, and I think I unofficially DNF'd it this morning. I just put it back on my NYRB shelf, and I'm like, I'll come back to you some other time.
The problem is I have sort of committed to writing about each of the books. I have the
I'm
dual
curious to see what
problem.
that article is going to be about for sure.
I don't know. Might be about like the New York Yankees. I mean, I have
Yeah.
no idea.
Yeah.
That's the problem is, on the one hand, if I finish it, I'll then have to write about it. What am I going to say? I don't know. If I don't finish it, I'll still have to write something. What am I going to say there? I don't know. It's very possible that whether I finish it or not, the article that the book club will get is going to be pretty much the same. I am technically still working through that one. I just grabbed, you told me to do this today. So I grabbed The Zone of Interest, and that's coming tomorrow, and I'll be starting that in the morning. And
It's so good.
let's see,
it's so good. Have you watched the movie?
no, I'm going in completely blind. I did the little read the sample. So I read the first page. Amazon will let you read a sample of something. So I've read the first page and I was like, okay, this is really interesting. And I just grabbed it.
Yeah. The movie is fantastic. I don't know if you like A24 movies. I'm a big fan of
Love
the
'em.
artistic nature. Yeah, the artistic nature of A24 I think is just beautiful. And Jonathan Glazer, I think one of the really great things about the movie is they used no film lighting. Like they just used natural lighting
All
and to kind
naturals,
of make
huh?
it more natural, and kind of like this is what was going on with these people. And there's no music playing, and so that's done on purpose because in the movie the house is like this paradise home. All of the background noise is everything that's happening in Auschwitz, and so it's almost like this like psychological horror where you're seeing these people just live these normal lives, and the kids are playing in the sprinkler garden, and then you hear these people getting like shot and screaming in the background. And it's just you can see in very consistent shots throughout the movie like the incinerator smoke, which we all know like what that smoke is from. It's a very interesting movie, and I stupidly decided to watch that one night at like 10 o'clock after my wife went to bed. And I just like, it was one of those nights I went to bed and just stared at the ceiling for like 2 hours. I'm like, why did I do that?
I did
But
that
yeah, the book.
I did that with Schindler's List. To spoil Schindler's List, there's a moment where you have this little girl and she's running, she's got like a pink coat on and then there's a shot later where
Oh,
it's
when she's
all
walking
black
through the
and white
city?
except for the yeah,
Yeah, that and the vantage point is when Schindler's on his horse
yeah,
with his is it like his mistress or his wife or something?
yeah, something like that. I just remember that
Oh, yeah,
scene,
yeah.
and I was wrecked. I was like, "Oh, man.
Yeah, no, Schindler's List, I made sure I watched during the day. I was like, "We're
Don't watch
watching."
that at night."
No, we're watching this at 9 a.m. Like,
With the cornflakes just is that
yeah,
worse? I don't know.
a couple hours of Saturday cartoons, and then we're moving on to Schindler's List, boys. So,
Yeah.
okay, cool. So you got Zone of Interest, you got Stone Door. What else you got on the docket?
Yeah. I have been picking through Comanche Moon by Larry McMurtry. I want to finish out the Gus and Call saga, ideally before the end of November. I'd like to finish Streets of Laredo before the end of November, but we'll see how that goes. It's so refreshing, I think, just reading the way he writes. It's so accessible, which I think I took for granted when I was reading Lonesome Dove earlier this year. It's great. It's comfort food, I think, at this point. And I love a good Western. I think I'm just a sucker for Westerns. I grew up on them, and I hadn't read many Westerns between my, I don't know, I probably stopped reading them when I was like 17 or 18. Might have read one or two between then and when I picked up Lonesome Dove earlier this year. And I was like, man, this is just such a good genre. And I know it's not for everybody. There's a lot of people that hate Westerns, but I think they're great. They're so fun.
Yeah, Lonesome Dove was one of the first like literary fiction books I chose to dive into, which is remarkable.
It's a gateway. Man.
Yeah, but I got 200 pages in, and I'm like, they have not left the ranch yet. Like,
Haven't done anything.
what are we doing? Like, they just got to the part where like they're getting ready to leave. They just sold a bunch of cows or whatever to these guys and getting ready to leave. And then I just put it down, and I just haven't picked it up back in months. But it is something I certainly want to finish. But yeah, that's from what I hear, I mean, it's just a beautifully written book. It had a moment. It feels like kind of late last year, kind of through the early part of this year. And I think we were together when you picked up Comanche Moon, or was it Comanche Moon or Streets of Laredo?
I think I got Dead Man's Walk and Comanche Moon when we were.
Yeah, I bought a lot
I
of
think
books
so.
that weekend.
It was a great weekend.
Yeah, well, I mean, since then I think I bought like 70 books, but we're not going to talk about that.
It's funny. I've got a Substack article coming in. I don't know when this is going to release. I've got a Substack article coming out next week about the New York Post wrote an article about Lonesome Dove's resurgence.
Mm.
And the writer of it had reached out to me and interviewed me for it. And so when I went and read it, I was like, oh, cool. Maybe I'll be in this article. Not like expecting it. I'm not a psycho, but I was hoping, I'm not in it. And I was like, well, okay, but I read the article, and it was so frustrating because I feel like it glossed over all the reasons why it had a resurgence. It just attributed it to cowboy bars, basically. And I wish I was exaggerating, but that is actually one of the reasons for its resurgence, as cited in the article, was cowboy bars. I basically
So
wrote
they're
a hit
basically
piece.
giving credit to Yellowstone,
Yeah,
characters like Rip, as to why Lonesome Dove had a resurgence.
yeah. Nothing to do with the fact that the book is good, but it was because of these cultural factors and women on TikTok. And I was like, I mean, listen, I'm on TikTok. I don't have any room to talk, but let's be serious here. It was not because of me or because of, it was because the book was good. And then somebody got it, they read it, and they were like, this book is good. Somebody else, because they saw that, or, some other word of mouth thing happened, and they read the book and they're like, this book is good, and so on and so forth. And it trickled down, and it was a domino effect. I digress.
Well, now we can slam the New York Times here on this show, since they didn't put Josh in the front page.
Yeah, that's the problem, is there is a conflict of interest. There's probably going to be somebody who reads it and go, oh, this dude's just mad because he wasn't in the article. And, fair.
They're gonna
But
get a little, they're gonna get a little slander email from New York Times. Hey, Josh, heard what you had to say. Here's our lawyers. Enjoy.
yeah, I copied and pasted my responses to the email that I got sent. And I was like, I think
Yeah.
this is all and it was nothing like what was in the article. They went a total different direction with it. And I was like, that's fine. Do what you want. I'm not.
They got your interview, and they're like, this guy has no idea what he's talking about anyway.
Yeah, they're like, this guy's an idiot. I was like, that's fine.
Yeah.
Do what you want.
But
But
they're like, who's this joker?
yeah, I was like, well, I have a
No, that's
Substack
funny.
audience
So-
for a reason. So they're going to get that one, whether they want it or not.
Yeah, no, that's I mean so that's now two guests that have been featured or interviewed anyway by big publications. I mean, your boy's right here, right? LA Times, Washington. I mean,
Well, I
I'm
mean,
right here.
we don't have Goldie Hawn, so we're
No,
not.
hey, that is true. Goldie Hawn did follow me on Instagram, and I mean, I may get an invite for Thanksgiving. I don't know. It's probably in the
Listen,
mail, and I can't express enough like how much better than everybody I think I am now, though. Like Goldie, like like my boss at work will be like, "Hey, can you do this for me?" I'm like, "Dude, who do you think you're talking to?"
you're talking to somebody who has communicated sort of with Goldie Hawn. I mean,
I'm like,
speak
"Goldie
speak
Hawn
real.
is I'm her adopted son."
Yeah, Haley the
Yeah,
other night was
so
like, if you go on, because Oliver Hudson and Kate Hudson are Goldie Hawn's kids, and she goes,
they're
if
basically my brothers and sisters. Yes.
right, she was like, if you, because Kate and Oliver Hudson have a podcast. She goes, if you get invited on Kate Hudson's podcast, now keep in mind, I think Oliver Hudson follows me. Not and Kate Hudson, that's so far out there, but she goes, if you go on Kate Hudson's podcast, I'm going to flip a lid. She's like, the 1 degree of separation is insane.
Yeah, no, that's
I was like, don't get your hopes up, but
my wife was actually saying, she's like, okay, so if you really think about it, Oliver Hudson like was da 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 da, and then Kate Hudson is like almost kind of basically friends with Taylor Swift. So like basically Taylor Swift knows who you are. And I'm like,
yeah.
yeah, I don't think that's how it works, honey, but yeah,
No,
whatever.
but you can dream, right? You can.
Right. Yeah. So quick update on what I'm reading. I posted a long video about it yesterday. I've been talking to you about this one particular book, which is Tinkers by Paul Harding. It's taking up all of my time. I'm slowly reading through it. It's just such a beautifully written book. I mean, your debut novel wins the Pulitzer Prize for Literature. I don't know what you do after that. Why are you still writing books, Paul Harding? I have no idea, but he did. He has a couple other books out that I bought like when I got to like page 50, and I'm like, no, this guy's a superstar. It's a beautifully, wonderfully written book, and I recommend everybody read it. I'm reading Help Wanted by Adele Waldman. That is a book about life in retail. It's a satirical fiction. Very good. Child of God by Cormac McCarthy.
Nice.
That's okay. It's only on page 40, but apparently it gets much better. Make Glue by Altessa Moshfegh. I read My Year of Rest and Relaxation last month, which has turned me into a sad girl lit bro, which I'm here for. But
I
she
saw that
said
book
that,
was on that was on, I think it was New York Times 100 best books in the last 100 years or something. I think Year of Rest and
I
Relaxation
think
was on there.
it's top 100 novels of the last 25, or top 30 of the
Maybe
last
that's what it was.
30 years. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great book. I not something I would typically read, not something that I expected to like, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. I read it in a day and a half. I'm reading a bunch of stuff. I'm starting down my Clarissa Spector canon. I read Besieged City by her, which is apparently not the place to start, which is probably why my experience with that was not as memorable. So I'm starting with her debut novel, Near to the Wild Heart. And then I'm jumping down the Helen DeWitt rabbit hole after being subliminally peer pressured by some folks on Instagram. The writing is absolutely diabolical. And I'm on page 20 of Your Name Here. I'm learning Arabic, not by choice. That's just what's on page 20.
That's where we are.
Maybe in a couple weeks, I'll be able to intro the podcast in Arabic. I don't know. Well, that's all up to Helen and what she has in store for me on the
Listen, I think I
upcoming
can
pages.
speak for everybody in saying that we would all be down for that.
I think it's actually Kurdish is the actual language, but yeah, that's where I'm at. So speaking of books, and we were talking about your podcast a little bit. You got your start as a book content creator. You started posting book reviews and book content, and blended that now with what you do with Compendium, and mix a little bit of the history content in with the book content. It's an interesting time to be talking about history and to be talking about books. And so talk a little bit about why that is your niche, and why you feel like it's important that you continue to push forward important discussions about history, and then also, pushing forward books in a time when, they're being pushed back against.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because a lot of this stuff just kind of happens and there's not as much of a plan behind it as maybe you'd think. I started making content because I was working on a novel and I was like, probably would be good to have people care about this novel if I finish it and potentially get it published. that would be smart, most likely. And I knew it was on the horizon. It wasn't like an immediate thing. Like it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. And I ended up finishing it and being like, yeah, this book sucks. But I just kind of kept with the book content. And I guess it's been like a year and a half now. And I have this like natural conflict of I'm interested in a lot of different things. And kind of the way that you succeed on social media is you have a thing that people know you for, and you just sort of double down on that over and over and over again. And so there's kind of this natural audience clash of if I post about history books, the people that care about that video are not quite the same people that care about, I don't know, fiction or whatever it is. And I've tried to sort of make this brand or whatever it is around the fact that I'll read a little bit of everything. And I think it's just kind of now getting to the point where people are, I can see it reflected in comment sections where people are like, oh, yeah, you'll read anything. And I might get a thriller review. I might get a literary review. I might get, I don't know, like who knows? And there's that part of it going on. I started the history thing. I've honestly always been interested in history. I was just a big hardcore history listener for a long time. I was listening to it on my honeymoon, which I would not recommend, but we laugh now. And it was always kind of in the back of my mind, like I could probably do that the same way that Dan Carlin does that. I could do that. It's not that difficult. He just sits there and talks about it, right? Stupid idea.
Yeah, it's not hard to replicate the most successful history podcast in the history of podcasts. No, not at all.
Right. It is simple. It is not easy. And I think when you start to do one, you go, I get it now. This guy is incredible. And there's a reason why he is what he is. But that part of it aside, I sort of fell into the trap of like, I can do this. And I've always had sort of like an obsessive personality where if I put my mind to something, I can kind of crank it out. And I guess it's probably been about a year and a half plus since I started working on the first Compendium show. Actually, it's probably been about 2 years. I made one. It sat on my desktop for like 6 months to a year. And then I came back and redid it. And then it turned into the first show. And it kind of was, I don't know, like I just started it. And then I jumped to the Vietnam series and here we are. I think what I set out to do initially was just explore stories three-dimensionally in a way that you go to history class in high school and college and you learn a version of history, but often that version of history just it's nowhere near as fascinating as the actual history because there's only going to be so much in it. And you get a lot more context and nuance. And that context and nuance is always what's fascinated me. And it's what I've tried to dive into with Compendium. And it's why the shows are so long, because I get fascinated by context and nuance. And in order to do that properly, it takes a while, especially with how things are, socially and politically today. Like it's, people just don't, I guess maybe generally, and generalizations will get you in trouble, but I feel like generally people don't pursue context and nuance in anything. I always have just wanted to dive into that extra layer below and figure out the why. And you get some really cool stories that way, but it also kind of is, that's maybe the dressed up version of how it happened. But if I'm being honest, it was sort of just this organic thing that like one thing led to another. And I just kind of kept doing it. And here we are. And it is kind of what it is.
Hey, folks. Editor Chris here. Apologies for popping in here in the middle of the episode. If you're watching the video feed of this podcast, we did have some technical difficulties on my end with my video feed. So you'll see the quality drastically drop on the video side on the back half of this podcast. I do sincerely apologize. I have since upgraded my MacBook to be more equipped for the podcast moving forward, and this will no longer be an issue. I do want to again apologize. We did make sure to maintain the integrity of the audio, and I did the best I could with the video on the back half of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you guys are enjoying the episode. Josh was such a fantastic guest. I'll get out of your way here. Enjoy the rest of the show.
But yeah, so there is this kind of like natural, I guess, audience conflict between the history people, the fiction people. And I've been thinking a lot more about what sort of content do I want to be like the main thing. And I think at different points I've said I want to do, the podcast, and I kind of do the social media stuff to feed into the podcast. I'm getting to a point where, the book stuff is doing really, really well. And I enjoy it. I've really enjoyed branching out into Substack, and I can write a little history on there, but doing this read along with people has been kind of an eye-opening moment, I guess. One, for how well it's been received, and then two, kind of the possibilities with that. You kind of have an engine there where there's, your top of funnel thing with Instagram and TikTok, and then if people go down the funnel, they get to this point where we're reading books with a community of people. And I know this is not a new thing. A lot of people do this. The conversations had and sort of some of the things that not everybody gets to see that have kind of come out of doing this. And also, it's been a really great exercise of reading something and then writing about it. I feel like I've gotten a much better reading experience selfishly out of doing that. So it's been kind of a win all the way around. And I think that might be, I guess the more I've thought about it, the more I've been like, yeah, this might be the thing that's kind of the hub. And then I'll just, the podcasts will be there and, the Instagram, TikTok content, that'll be there. Doing the reading with a community of other readers, crazy, but that seems to be a thing that's really great and people crave it. And I really enjoy it. And it's been really fun.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you, it's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is kind of the intentionality of the content that you're creating. I know for me, I've also started to build a community on Substack, and I recently joined Bindery, which is heavily focused on community-driven content. As we start to see these social media platforms develop, and it's really built more for how much attention can you capture with new viewers, right? And people that are not existing inside of your community. Substack and places like Bindery and these, more private, more intimate communities seem to be having a moment. I know for me, like in 2026, I plan on slowing down the volume of the amount of books I read. I am going to be releasing my 2026 slow reads list here on Substack shortly. And I plan on committing more time to like long form content on YouTube and a lot more time and attention to Substack and Bindery. I'm curious, as a fellow creator in a similar space with a relatively similar following in terms of what their interests are, kind of what your thoughts are on the mission of your content moving forward and kind of what you're going to be prioritizing. I know you talked about it a little bit there at the end of your last answer, but I guess kind of zooming out a little bit and looking forward, if you could kind of, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's really interesting you bring that up because I've been wrestling with that for months and probably like pointedly wrestling with it the past few weeks. Just about every night my wife and I go on a walk, and one of the main things that we've been talking about is just me verbally processing content and sort of where all the pieces fit, how the Legos all fit together. I've tried a lot of different things. I'm doing Substack. I've got the podcast. I've got the Instagram and TikTok stuff. I've been writing a lot of different things in there, and I've kind of sat back for the past month or so and thought like, okay, what do I really want to do? What if in 5 years all of this works out? What does that working out look like? And there's a lot of different paths that could go. But I was always thinking, like, when I started this, the ultimate goal was to walk into Barnes and Noble and see my name on a book. I think that is still very much, within the realm of possibility. Obviously, it'd be great if, you can go full time doing any one of these things. If you can go full time as a, book reviewer, if you can go full time on Substack or with a podcast or whatever. Something I have felt really arrested by is the idea that, like, if you write a book, people care about it, then, there's much more staying power or longevity. And then at the end of it, you're like, I've got a book, it's pretty great. So I've pulled out some different outlines from a drawer. I've written down story kernels, a half dozen times, and I've kind of pulled those out and thought about them. I'm still figuring it out. It's very fluid, I guess, but I think the main thing is each of these content pieces for me sort of it's a cog in a wheel. Instagram and TikTok stuff, the way social algorithms work right now, they are less community focused than you might think. They're very much like you're bringing in all sorts of people, but you're not necessarily reaching outside of maybe a core group. You're not really reaching your followers consistently. And so, there's been this movement over the past year or maybe 2 years where it's this idea called the death of the follower because, your followers may not see your stuff all the time. And so, with a podcast, obviously people, if they subscribe to your show, they're going to get it every time. and they're going to care about
Yeah.
it. And that's great. So that's one solution to the death of the follower thing. The other solution is, and I've tinkered with, I feel like all of them. The other solution is, well, if you have an email list and somebody gets your email in their inbox and they sign up for it, that is very much a direct kind of a thing where they're signing up to get you into their email inbox. So how can you serve that, audience or niche or whatever it is? How can you create a community there? And so I've been thinking about ways to attack that. I think the long answer here is there's a lot of balls up in the air, and I'm still trying to figure out
Yeah,
how they're all
for
going to
sure.
land. But, I think very briefly, I think Instagram and TikTok is kind of the whole engine of the whole deal. And I think Substack for me has been kind of a creative revelation because I realized when I started that I had lost, or the muscle of writing for me had kind of atrophied. And it became very apparent when I sat down to write some of the early newsletters I was sending out. I was like, golly, dude, I can't write anymore. Or maybe I can never
Yeah.
write. So
You write something and you're like, people are going to think this is AI. That's how bad this actually is.
yeah, no, I've written several articles that have gone out there, and you just sort of write it and you send it out and you hope it's not terrible and you hope people care about it at least a little bit. But it's been fun in the sense that I feel like I have, I don't know, worked that muscle a little bit, and it's sort of led me back into writing fiction, writing some nonfiction. It's been a great exercise, honestly. And I think it sort of opened my eyes back to, the reason you really started this whole deal was because you wanted to write a book, and you
Right.
have not finished a book. So you should probably do that. And I think
Yeah. That's
been kicking around.
it's a big step. Yeah. To finish that book. And that's such a great goal. You know what I mean? Is to, like you said, walk into a Barnes and Noble and see your name on a shelf. I think that's obviously super admirable. I know, just having read your writing and seen the stories that you're able to put together on Compendium, know that, obviously you're extremely capable of. And I do hope that does come to fruition. But yeah, I appreciate your answer there. It's something that I too have been wrestling with. I think ideally I would not do TikTok and Instagram as regularly as I do now. I have no interest in doing it. That kind of volumetric content is something that I no longer want to do long term. It's not because I don't enjoy it, but it's just like, how many top 5 videos can you make before it's like, what are you even talking about? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The reason I created this podcast is because it enables me to have more meaningful conversations about literature that I think is important and people that I think are important in this space. And so ultimately that's kind of the goal, is to utilize this platform and Substack to, and Bindery to continue to build a community that cares about those things just as much as I do, and wants to see the growth of more young men reading books and stuff like that. But yeah, it's an interesting road that we're all on as creators and, the writers out there and stuff like that. It's a mission-based opportunity that we have every day, is to push. We all have agendas, right? As creators, we all want to push something forward, whether that's, you creating a novel or me getting young men to stop listening to, Joe Rogan's podcast and start reading more books. Yeah, that's a great answer.
Well, I
Talking
can tell
about,
you this.
yeah, go ahead.
I can tell you this. When you texted me that you were starting the podcast for real, I was like, oh, thank God, because in talking to you, I knew that it was going to be something that you were going to put a lot of thought and time into, and it was going to be really good. And listening to the episode with Claire, it was incredible. It was so much fun, and I was like, and it's funny too, because knowing, I guess maybe seeing some of the behind the curtain stuff and kind of having those, I guess, back alley conversations in DMs or through text or whatever. It's just fun to see what you're reading, see how you're thinking about things. But then also when you're talking to somebody else, the different, creators, we present ourselves a certain way on social media, but it's always really fun to see okay, you talk about this thing. We are all much more 3-dimensional than our internet selves. And so getting to, I know the 3-dimensional version of you, but other people don't. And maybe I didn't know the 3-dimensional version of Claire as much, but I got to get a window into that when y'all were on the podcast together. So it's fun, I guess, selfishly, because I have some there's that 1 or 2 degrees of separation, which is really fun, but been a really good thing so far, which I think is admirable and awesome. And I'm really excited for what you've got coming up.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And yeah, to your point, like Claire is just someone that was kind of the point of having Claire be the first guest, is being in a room or sitting across from somebody that is smarter than you. I think, especially today, is really important. You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
she is a Juilliard graduate. She's a classically trained pianist. She's a classically trained Russian educated, like just all of these things that you're like, I am nowhere near as smart as this human being. And she's so well spoken and well thought and disciplined in what she says. And you can just tell like everything she says is purposeful and it's well thought out beforehand. And you can see that in her content. Her content is very crisp and very to the point. And it's why she has just had this meteoric rise. She was featured on the front page of CNN, on BuzzFeed. Like, she's just doing all these incredible things. I think she's like partnered with Fable now, and she's just doing such remarkable things. And that is what I want to do with this show, is to highlight people that are doing important things. And, you know, you and I, when we sat in that coffee shop, when I visited, that's a conversation that I'll probably never forget, just talking about content and the importance of, you know, I remember you asking in that conversation, like, how do I continue to make this better? And that's the mission I think is important, is like, you know, you have something with Compendium and you know you have something important that you want to do with it. How do I make it better? And as long as we have that mindset, I think that's really important. As long as we continue to talk about books, I think is obviously a positive. And so, yeah, I think looking, you know, short and long term at kind of the goal for the content is, I don't want to be making 33-minute videos every month for the next, 10 years. Certainly, I want this to mature into something more meaningful and community based. And I think that kind of is building. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm hoping to go with it. But when you talk about great books, we both recently read White Noise by Don DeLillo, and it was a fantastic read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't know that we'll have as much time as I'd hoped to talk at scale about it, but I wanted to talk about the importance of that book. I think there were a lot of really important themes in that novel. And so I'll hand the floor over to you to kind of start with your thoughts on White Noise, what your thought was on the themes and DeLillo as a writer, and kind of kick us off there.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I need to read it again because it feels like that is an onion book. There's a lot of layers to it, and the more you read it, the more you're peeling things back. Because there's so many little things here and there in dialogue where it's like, man, if I go back understanding the story, I'll probably get this a bit better. It's about a guy and his wife that are basically afraid of dying, and sort of how they each react to this anxiety. And it's kind of brought up in different situations throughout the novel about this theme of, what there's a passage where the main character is basically talking about how both he and his wife wonder who's going to die first, and their different reactions to that question, and how he sort of reacts to it one way, she reacts to it a different way. There's this event that happens that kind of puts all of that on the front burner. She reacts to it one way, and, initially he reacts to it a very different way, but then he kind of comes around and kind of reacts to it a similar way that she does. I don't know, like, there's so much to it and a depth to it that I feel like I can't even do it justice talking about it. But it was an experience, I think, which is maybe some of the highest praise I can give it, because you don't really forget where you were and kind of how your brain interpreted what he was trying to do. And let's not forget the fact that he's one of the best prose writers I think I've ever read. So this like sensory experience that you're having while you're reading it is just impeccable. And I think it's probably the best book I've read this year. And I say that having read Lonesome Dove and raved about it, having read some other great books and raved about them. But I think this one was just incredible.
Yeah. The really interesting thing about White Noise is it's written in 1985, published in 1985. And I just think the foresight that DeLillo had to touch on themes of consumerism and capitalism and how easily distracted people are. And in the novel, you notice that the family is bound together by these traumatic events, right? They're always hovering around the TV, and that's just kind of the way that they bond. They're all kind of from these different backgrounds, because Babette and Jack, they're on like their fourth and fifth marriages. And I think they just have Wilder together. And so all the kids are kind of all over the place. And it's just really interesting that DeLillo was able to kind of see how distracted and just disconnected people can get. Even 40 years later, it just feels very relevant. And it was something that I thought was remarkable. And you're right, the prose is just really strong. It's the dialogue, especially with Heinrich, is some of the quirkiest, funniest dialogue. I mean, for a kid to just be that, he's definitely got like Asperger's or something. Like he's just like a funny, really funny, high-strung, intelligent. Oh yeah, he's a nutcase. And he's like argumentative, and he's a know-it-all, and he's like Mr. Last Word, and he's great. He's like such a funny character that like DeLillo is able to thread in and out of the novel in really wonderful ways. What's great about White Noise is there's really two major overarching stories in this book, and almost kind of three. In the beginning, we get the family dynamics and kind of what Jack is doing at the college on the hill with his Hitler studies and, you know, kind of what's going on with Babette and their fear of death and things like that. And then in the second, we have the Toxic Air event, which is a completely different omen that exists as its own plot point. And then we get the Dylar situation kind of in the third part there, and there's a full narrative there. And so it's almost like these like three blended novellas in this one novel. And I just think that is so powerful, and kind of curious like what your thoughts were on that, and kind of what you took away from, you know, how that book was built and put together, and what that, you know, you kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but kind of that experience of reading something like that for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because it felt very much like there was an absence of plot, which was totally fine with me because I was in it mostly for characters and prose. And this isn't true, but it feels like nothing broadly is happening. You just have these moments, and then it's always braided together. I love how he brings out like the radio said, and it's a quote of something happening on the radio, or the TV said something, because it's just always in the background, and it's, you know, it's the white noise of our lives. You have entertainment and things always happening. But also I think there's a moment when he overtly says this fear of death is white noise that's just constant, and you sort of tune it out. There's a lot of different things, and he touches on these different themes in multiple ways at multiple times. So you kind of pick up on it in different situations. It was interesting, like the broad 3-part structure, because it wasn't quite a 3-act structure. I guess technically it was, but
in a way, right? Yeah.
In a way, yeah. You have sort of self-contained stories that fit together with one another. You know, the third part feels maybe at the end like a little bit of a psychological thriller. The second part, yeah. The first part is more straight drama and like social commentary. And then
I love the first part because it has short chapters, which I love short chapters.
Yes.
And then the second part is just like, the second part, it just like felt like it never ended. And I'm like, dude, I need to come up for air to breathe. Like,
yeah.
And I just felt like I didn't get that in the second part. And then it kind of went back to that in the third part.
It was so interesting because you're right. Like, it was so snappy early on, and it drew me into it. And then it slowed down, and it wasn't a negative necessarily, but there was a noticeable stark difference between pacing. And yet broadly, overall, the pacing was fairly consistent. It was so interesting because like DeLillo is way smarter than me. So I know there is a attention to detail and intentionality behind it, and like a level of editing and rewriting that is intense, because it's obvious reading it that there's a lot of, you know, I don't know how long he rewrote it, but I would imagine you've got, 6 months to a year of just rewrites after the first draft, and you can kind of tell that there's just layers upon layers upon layers to it.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a really remarkable book. I'm reading Libra this month with a couple buddies, a buddy read with a couple folks. It's November. That's, when JFK was assassinated. And so it just feels like a timely read. Libra is considered to be a phenomenal book. And I know that you and I have talked about potentially reading some more of DeLillo together, which is something that I am super excited to do. If you have not read White Noise by Don DeLillo, I have a couple videos out on it now. I don't know if you've released a video yet. I'm sure it's coming.
Not yet.
Yeah. So I asked a couple folks for some questions, some listener questions for the pod today. And I wanted to go over some of them with you, get your answers for some of the folks who listen to this show. And so let's pull up a few questions here and get your thoughts on them. So this question is from Dill Reads. He's actually someone I think I'm reading Libra with, actually. Dill Reads asks, how does your interest in history inform your fiction reading choices and vice versa?
Shoot, that's good. I think I was telling you this earlier today, actually, that there are certain historical periods that if there is a historical fiction of that period, I'm going to be drawn to it more than others. Sometimes people who read a lot of history, they'll talk about how they can't read fiction because it's fictionalized. And I don't really ever feel that. Like, I think you can, at least I can jump in between nonfiction and fiction really easily, but it is kind of like a frame of mind thing. But again, like I'll go read some philosophy and then pick up, like I've got two browser windows open right now, and one of them is Plato and one of them is Mao Tzu. And I've got a Blake Crouch book laying in the corners. I don't know. I think maybe the short and simple of it is there's historical periods that I'm naturally really drawn to. And if I find a book about that period by, maybe not just by any author, but if I see an author has written about that period, I'll get really excited about it. And I'm naturally drawn to like Bernard Cornwell's, or what's the other? I think I might have a book of his in here. There's another historical fiction author that I'll pick up pretty much anything
Ken
he writes,
Follett.
but Ken Follett is one. I think he's getting a little repetitive for me. He's written several books that I really enjoy.
Yeah. I think, and to your point, like, I think it was Michael Kist recently posted a video about Shogun, and he didn't have a very positive review because, again, of the history that he knows about it. And kind of to your point, I think some people are unable to maybe separate what they know of the history. And he's obviously, one of the nonfiction pioneer creators, certainly a big part of why I create content. And so, yeah, I think he's someone that talked about that. Additionally, I think when it comes to history, especially guys like us that, we read a ton of history. I obviously read a lot more fiction now, but have read a ton of history and love reading history. There is a sense of, and specifically with the history fans, there's definitely a sense of protectionism with that history, right? And so I think they have a problem with it being fictionalized or dramatized. And, you see a lot of fiction movies get really criticized by people that really love history. And so I think that probably plays a part in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something that I've noticed for sure.
Yeah, there's elements of it. I think with movies, it's really easy to criticize because a lot of times, again, generalizations get you in trouble. But I feel like with a lot of historical movies that, turn into blockbusters or whatever, there's just like not even an attempt to be historically accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with story, you got to make it believable. And so if you're writing or making a movie about a historical event, like let's be able to suspend our disbelief about or create a world that feels realistic and lived in. And if we're not going to do that, and there's obviously something that sticks out like a sore thumb, we're not there. There's people that get pretty pedantic about stuff, but broadly speaking, there's clearly some movies that like just don't give a crap about the history part of it. And then there's some that do. And I think the ones that are faithful insofar as, the history is like a Robert Eggers movie. The history is really well represented in his movies by and large, but also there's an art to it and a story to it that is really impressive. And so he creates this world that you can sort of fall back into, and it creates these great experiences, but it's also, great history if you want to read into it in that sense. But it's a great story more than anything else. And he just sort of allows you to fall into the story, which is, I think, kind of the point.
Yeah, his I forget what his Viking movie was, but it was wild for sure.
Northman. Yeah, that was nuts.
Northman, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was the Northman. That was a crazy, crazy movie. He also did Nosferatu.
He did.
Right. Yeah, that's one I have to watch at 10 a.m.
I need to watch that one too.
I will not watch it at night. Ori, who is someone that is a loyal follower of mine and yours, I believe, as well. A very, very wonderful woman, has always very nice things to say to me. And question was, how did Josh come up with the list of books for his community read along on Substack? And then she mentioned Mice of Men being the first one. I think it's a great question. Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, I wish I could say that it was an incredibly thought out thing where I went up on the top of a mountain and I conversed with a monk and I came down and I said, here's the books we're going to read. Honestly, it was the convergence of books that I had an interest in. I think I talked to you a little bit about the list and included a couple with a little bit of a nudge. Some of it was, I want to read this. Some of it was, here's books that I think people would be interested in reading with a group of people. And some of it was, here's books that I know, I had no concept of what Hard Rain Falling was going to be. And that was, we hear this one creator give a glowing review of it. And I was like, okay, that probably fits within these other books. Let's read it. I selfishly really wanted to read Flannery O'Connor. I wanted to get into some Steinbeck. And, so there we go. It was kind of a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I'm working on kind of a big Google Doc of some potential books for what we might read moving forward.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I know that you said you've had positive reviews about the interaction and the folks that have, signed up and signed on to do that read along. And so I'll make sure to drop all of the information on Josh's disgustingly literate read along in the show description. So those are the listener questions. Ending question that I have that I have been sitting on that I have not told you what that question is. It's always good to kind of just end the show on a surprise, I think. You are a big fan of history. You are someone that appreciates history and chooses to revisit and examine it in the lens that it existed in. And I think that's important. My question is, if you could go back in history and change the outcome of any historical event, what event would it be? And what would the new outcome be?
Oh, man, if I could go back and change one event. So basically we're looking at a counterfactual here. If this one thing doesn't happen, probably a few different ways I could go. One thing that might be better for a lot of people, innocent people that got killed, is what happens if the Germans don't send, what's his name? What's the guy who was the first dude that the Germans put on a train and sent in World War I to Russia? And he was one of the originators of communism. I am blanking on his name. Long story short, the Germans in World War I, there was this guy who was a degenerate, basically living in, I want to say it was Berlin. They put him on a train because he was a political agitator and he was one of the primogenitors of communism. And they stuck him on a train.
Engels?
Yeah, Frederick Engels. They stuck him on a train, sent him into Russia, and he helped start the Bolshevik Revolution, which toppled the Tsarist regime and then led to the USSR, the Soviet Union.
Interesting. Not one that I had on my bingo card. I thought you were going to go way back. I thought you were probably going to go like medieval kind of Viking time there.
There's a lot of good ones there too, though. Like, what if the French never give Vikings a piece of land in France and then the Norman invasion never happens?
Or, you think of 1066, like if William loses, because, William winning set up England as we know it now. Right. I think that's something that, what does the world look like? What does the Western world look like if the Vikings win?
It'd be vastly different. Vastly different. Yeah, I go with communism just because, like, you don't have Red China, you don't have communist Vietnam, you don't have, and maybe some of those really nasty things end up happening anyway because we're humans and we, figure out ways to mess things up. But maybe some of these atrocities and genocides and massacres don't end up happening. And maybe the Eastern and Western world in like 2025 look a little bit different. And maybe you don't have this, I don't know, contentiousness in modern times. Who knows? Maybe it would happen anyway. But
I think if I could go back and change anything in history, it would probably be the creation of the internet. I think we're just all becoming worse human beings
remove it.
Yeah, I just, I think, or that, or like just capping it like email. You know what I mean? Like we don't.
Yeah.
Social media, probably. Like I think social media is just becoming a poisonous thing. But yeah, so that's where we'll end. That's a really interesting question. Thank you to Dylan and Lori for the listener questions. Josh, thank you so much for your time. A couple quick exit points here. If you want to follow Josh on social media, you can do so at Josh Reads Books. He just recently released To the Sound of Distant Guns Part 2. I will link the episode link in the show description. You can sign up to be a subscriber on Substack to join the Disgustingly Literate read along. Josh talked about the books. Just finished up Of Mice and Men, Hard Rain Falling, Stone Door, and then there's Flannery O'Connor. And is that it? Or is there someone else in that?
There's White Noise in there as well.
White Noise in there as well. So fantastic list of books. I'm sure that you're not required to read at the same pace as everybody else, but it's a great community to be a part of. Josh is one of the top creators over in the history and now kind of history literature space as well on Substack. So make sure you're following Josh's content. Make sure you're listening to the podcast. And Josh, thank you so much for your time as always. And I know that I'll be talking to you pretty soon.
Yeah, dude. Thanks so much for having me on. This was a blast.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have you back on soon. I appreciate your time.